Welcome, and thanks for being here, and thanks to the organizers for this great event. We are quite happy to be talking about quantum technologies with you as within the context of, ethics of emerging technologies. Just before starting, first I will introduce myself, then my panelists, and then talk a bit about why we are talking about quantum technologies now, and what are they, at least as far as we understand and conceptualize those. But we really want this to be a bit interactive, let's say. So if you have any burning questions while we are continuing this conversation, just feel free to, just pop in, ask a question. So let's start. I'm Zeki. I'm currently a researcher at Carlo Institute of Technology in Germany at Institute for Technology Assessment and Systems Analysis. I usually joke that I'm a physicist by training, social scientist by choice. My fields are science and technology policy studies and technology assessment, but my origin is in quantum networks and quantum information science. And let me introduce my panelists, whom I know, and actually don't need this, but I don't want to be making mistakes. So Pieter is a professor of philosophy of technology in TU Delft in Netherlands. He is leading ethical research in Netherlands National Program on Quantum Technologies, which is called Quantum Delta NL. And his background is in philosophy of physics and technology. And Luca is at University of Twente. He's teaching technology ethics there. He is an expert in philosophy of technology and cognitive science, and his background is in continental philosophy. If you agree with those assessments, let's start with why are we talking about quantum technologies? So usually, if I have slides, what I do is I show, why are we talking about quantum technologies? Because it's being funded quite heavily for a technology of that scale, which is not everybody is really aware of it. There aren't any major applications out there. Things like ChatGPT doesn't exist for quantum technologies. And usually how we distinguish between why we are talking about quantum technologies now is that there has been a kind of let's not say a revolution, but something like a very accelerated progress in making these technologies work, let's say. Because when we say quantum technologies, we usually refer to this second generation of quantum technology. So it's not like transistors or MRIs, which are already known, have applications, everybody's using those things. But we are referring to things like quantum computers, which are perceived to be a little bit, less understandable by the public, let's put it this way, or things like quantum networks, quantum internets, where you can distribute quantum states between separate nodes, or things like quantum sensors, where you use single particle properties like spin and other type of quantum properties to do sensing and metrology. So basically anything and everything that uses principles of quantum mechanics, but in a novel way, can be pushed under this quantum technologies umbrella. But if we are looking from a policy and governance perspective, the main focus are quantum computing, quantum sensing, quantum communications. And a bit like quantum simulation, but usually it is just swept under quantum computing. With that, I would actually like to ask my first question about how do you conceptualize quantum technologies in your work? So what do you do?
There are no quantum technologies, so that's why I was hesitant. As Zeki said, quantum technologies refer to a set of technologies, but they are all in the first phase of prototypes or things which are in the lab. we can have an argument that the quantum sensors are already out there, but quantum computers, quantum internet is not there. We're actually dealing here with a technology which is on paper existing. Lots of money goes to it, and we have to operate in that field. So I conceptualize it in short as a promise. A huge promise. Can say more about that, but that's the first thought.
Thank you. And Luca, just briefly, how do you conceptualize it?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you for having me here, and thank you for Stephen for this nice invitation. Well, I'm interested in quantum technologies because, as you said, Peter, there is a, I mean, to my eyes, there is a kind of paradox here, because we have no quantum technologies in the sense that they are on the paper, there are a lot of promises, there are a lot of talks about quantum technologies, a lot of magazine articles, a lot of promises, a lot of money, but actually we don't have any clue about the real application and the practical application, and therefore we don't have any clue about the social consequences, social impact of these quantum technologies. And this is an ethical problem, because how can we formulate some ethical rules, norms, principles, as you prefer to call it, if we don't really know nothing, basically, or almost nothing, about the real application of this technology and their consequences. And then
I would disagree a little bit, but yeah, it's actually a good, segue to, because here it writes, is it necessary to take them as an object of ethical analysis? And I know you have some opinions on this, and I know that Peter has some opinions on this, but since you say we don't know anything about it, let's start with you.
Okay. I mean, yes, of course it's important to develop some kind of ethical investigations of quantum technologies, because there are big promises and there are a lot of money, there are a lot of projects into the field. The real problem is that it's all on paper. We don't really know, we don't entirely know the social impact of this kind of technologies, so we can't really say something about the acceptance, the trust in this kind of technologies. Of course, we have prototypes. Of course, we know the applications. We know the main application of these technologies, but I think that we're still not completely ready to develop ethical reflections on this technology. We have to prepare the ground. We have to prepare the premises and the conditions of this kind of investigation. That's what I mean. I'm not saying that it's not useful to think about the ethics of quantum technologies now, because of course there are a lot of things to talk about, cryptography, or about also the dual use of this kind of technologies. I'm saying that we have to work on multiple levels: communication, education for people, but also for designers and engineers working in this kind of technologies. Education about the ethics, about how to formulate and how to see ethical problems in those technical problems. So I think that it's still an open question. That's what I mean.
And Peter, since you are leading the ethical investigations in Netherlands, I guess...
I have to, yeah, I have to. Now, there are a couple of reasons to start with an ethics of quantum technologies. One is that it's simply the new kid on the block. So hey, you got all this whole series of new emerging technologies, and quantum is one of them. There's lots of investment in it, so yeah, let's immediately also include ethical analysis. A second reason to be specifically interested in quantum was that the physicists sold it as something completely ununderstandable. they already said about quantum physics themselves that, okay, we don't understand what it is, and whomever says that she does know it, they haven't understood it well. That's Richard Feynman. And that rubbed off to the first communication about quantum technologies. It was said, yeah, it's new. We can't explain it because no one understands, and therefore it is really innovative because we don't understand it. And that is really kind of a tricky framing of a technology. You sell something or you start to developing it immediately with the statement that you will not understand. So don't worry, you don't understand, we'll decide for you. So that was the second reason. The third reason, which is making it really interesting right now, is that it is the first clear-cut emerging technology which is right in the middle of the geopolitical turmoil of this time. So we see around quantum lots of movements about who owns it, will we collaborate with the other blocs? The UK left the European Union. Will we still collaborate with them? Can postdocs in Europe be from other countries outside, from Asia? So what? All those geopolitical maneuvers are, the theater of quantum technology is the clearest one where you can see that happening. So as an ethicist, I'm really interested in that third phenomenon.
Thank you. And so this brings us to how you actually study these, which approaches, which methods are used to, study the ethical implications of quantum technologies.
Since we don't have applications, we had one, of course. Initially, quantum computers are being developed because they can decrypt digital communication out there. So they're really promising. If you can do that, hey, you're in charge of the digital communication. It was said, okay, well, we need another 20 years before we have a big enough quantum computer to actually do it. So let's not focus too much on it, but let's look at other applications. No one knew, as Luca said, what the other applications were actually. They slowly emerged. Well, that means from an ethical point, methodological point of view, that standard things like responsible innovation, talking with the stakeholders, what do you think about this application? Of no use, because we could not even, we could not identify the stakeholders. So that is on the back burner, responsible research innovation. What came instead of it is exploring, brainstorming, designing with any stakeholder, what could you do with quantum technology? So we often go doing kind of technology assessments, but exploratory technology assessments, going to ministries, to companies. What could you do with quantum internet in order to prepare, but also to understand what the social impact would be? The second line which is opened and which makes quantum technology ethics interesting is that the policymakers started to shape it. So not only Brussels and Washington and Beijing are doing policy in this domain, also the UNESCO, we already had the UNESCO around, OECD, they are trying to develop anticipatory policy measures in order to not let it derail. I don't have a method for ethicists how to join that, but I do know I have to join that process because the things which will shape this technology in the future, it's now there. There's the action, I want to be part of it. Maybe you know a method to be part of policy development. I haven't, but it's really fun to do.
It was for me. No, it's interesting actually, because we usually think about technological development as something that is imposed by policy, that is shaped by policymakers, governments, academic people. But we don't usually think about the bottom up, in the sense that we don't usually think about technological development as something that is shaped by people who receive this technology, who have to cope with the consequences of a particular kind of technology. So one, because I mean, we are talking about the Coleridge dilemma, as it was mentioned in the previous panel. One of the ways to avoid that dilemma is looking at how people imagine this technology. So how people think about quantum mechanics, and therefore also quantum technologies, how people, which kind of beliefs, which kind of imaginaries people are developing about quantum technologies, because imaginaries are important, because they influence the acceptance of a particular kind of technology, they influence also policymakers and also governments. So it's also interesting to explore what we can call the hermeneutic technology assessment. How can we, what can we learn about this kind of technology from the imaginaries, the narratives about quantum mechanics? In this case, as you said, there is this kind of sort of myth, sort of huge narrative about quantum that cannot be understood by anyone. But this can have ethical consequences, because it can lead to a sort of technological determinism. So we just have to accept what a quantum computer decides. So just to add to what you said, we also have to take into consideration different ways to maybe to interpret the Coleridge dilemma in this case.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I can add from my perspective is, so you mentioned about this exploratory, technology assessment efforts. You mentioned, bringing in bottom-up stakeholders to, combat, let's say, this technological determinism approach. And yeah, there are studies, active studies on doing this. So, for example, for the German Parliament, we are doing this military use of quantum technologies analysis for peace and security policy purposes. So I would say more and more of these studies are, starting to populate the literature and, inform us on these directions to go. But as also you a bit, highlighted that, the field is quite captured, let's say, with this, geopolitical turmoil that's going on, which brings me to my next question. What has changed in the field since you, got in? Because I know you have been involved here for more than we have been. Like, how has it changed for you?
Yeah, so I have a background in philosophy of quantum mechanics as an academic field, and there also the question was, okay, how can we explain quantum physics for ourselves to the rest of physics and society? And really interesting, so this quantum reality, Schrödinger's cat, we don't know if he's dead or alive, all these riddles about quantum physics. So initially, when I entered the field, I thought, okay, that will be a big one. So how can we evolve this narrative about quantum such that we can explain it to the others? So we have to work on that, find new ways. Well, what changed in my perspective of ethics of philosophy of quantum technologies is one, that the mysteriousness of quantum is not important. It doesn't play a role in current discussions about quantum technologies. Second, And that's really a kind of an interesting flaw which is emerging in national programs on quantum technologies, is that initially, for instance, in Europe here, the aim of national programs on quantum technologies was simply to beat American. That was the issue on economic dimension. So we talked about, people talked about, Quantum Valley will be in Europe. And they referred to Silicon Valley and the feeling, rats, we missed Silicon Valley. We are not in charge as Europeans with the digital technology. We're going to reverse that for the quantum technologies, so we'll have Quantum Valley in Europe. And I think there are at least 2 regions in Germany who already call it themselves Quantum Valley. So it's kind of nuts.
I would say more than 2.
More than 2. What you see now is that Brussels, European Union, United Kingdom, United States, they don't talk so much anymore about the economic incentive. They talk about the sovereignty and autonomy tension. They want to keep the technology, or develop the technology in Europe or in the US without dependencies on the other, because they want to be sovereign. And it has to do with safety, security issues. We don't want that the quantum computer from the US will see what we are doing with Greenland, say. Just mention a case. And we don't want to be dependent on a call from Washington, D.C. say, sorry, we'll shut down your programs. We want to be autonomous. And then all of a sudden, you see a big tension. The startups, the companies want to collaborate. They want to capture international markets. And what you see now is that, no, that's not going to happen. No one is anymore wanting to fund those kinds of enterprises. And that in itself introduces lots of ethical questions. You mentioned I work in Delft. There's a big quantum laboratory working, 300 people. And there are lots of people from China and from Iran and from lots of interesting, skilled people from all over the world. And all of a sudden, no. That will not be continued. So that leads enormous to new ethical questions about open science, about solidarity, and so on. So those are the 2 things I've learned.
Luca?
Yeah, absolutely. No, when I entered the field, there were all these questions about research, communication, research integrity, and I was in Delft, actually. But my first question, because I was working on the ethics of quantum technologies, was a little bit different, because coming from a philosophical background, I was looking for what is really special in this field. What is the new ethical problems that the quantum technology pose, that quantum technology can raise. And indeed, after a few years, I understand that that was not the real question, actually. Indeed, you can find good arguments for claiming that, okay, quantum technologies can raise, they can be said special from an ethical point of view, but you can also find a lot of arguments to claim the opposite. Of course, a technology does not have to raise completely new ethical questions to be ethically relevant. But I mean, this is not a question. The question is more how to, on the one hand, how to understand the hype about quantum technologies, how to avoid what I would call a flat normative ethical approach. I mean, an ethical approach that is only about formulating principles and norms that we have to apply blindly. The third point was, at least from my perspective, avoiding the overwhelming ethicization of that specific kind of technology, in the sense that we have to avoid a sort of what is happening with AI. We are producing too much rules, too much norms, too much codes about AI, and this can be actually an ethical problem, because it creates so much noise that we don't understand how to act, how to manage this kind of technology. So, yeah, this is the point, actually.
Yeah, so, I mean, building on that, I want to ask actually both of you. So you mentioned like this normative approaches. Pieter, you also mentioned a bit like this pragmatic approaches, like you go to the ministries, you go to the companies, you talk with them. And of course there's like Claire is missing, but like there's the critical approach as well. So basically critically approaching this, you know, what is going on, and they're, you know, contextualizing, like situating. And my question to you, which will be my last question, and then we will open up to our audience, is whose job is it to do all this? Like, what is an appropriate division of moral labor in this field? Because like we kind of also discussed during lunch that, you know, or should ethicists play a role as, you know, this person like a court saying yes or no, or should they, you know, take place within the stakeholders and accept the risks that comes with it, so basically to be overruled by other stakeholders in certain cases. But should we do it differently? Should we do it similarly to AI? Should we do it similar to nano? Should we do it similarly to biotech? Like, how should this, you know, labor be organized within this domain, which is a new domain? And as you know, highlighted in the beginning, you know, there isn't established rules of doing ethical implications research of this field.
Now, also remembering the previous panel on AI, something which struck me there was that there was this strong division being made between the engineers and the politicians, or the engineers and the ethicists. And we cannot just start talking with the engineers, say, okay, you have to make fair AI, because it's not yet clear what that is. So we have to first, as ethicists, go to our own conferences, make that clear, and then go back to these engineers. Well, that model will not work. It does not work in the university I work at. We immediately start talking with the engineers, and they are quite capable to also understand what is going on. So there's already immediately an interface between ethics, policy, and the engineering. And what I try to do, and what I propose, and what also defines the role of ethics, is to immediately go to those places where the ethics is being shaped right now. In order to, referring to the Collingridge dilemma, immediately go to the politicians of the European Commission, of UNESCO, talk with them, try to help them explore the thing, and also give input on what is quantum for good, or how can you realize the Sustainable Development Goals. So it's really embedded, and that leads to two things. One, we have to be careful that we're not just walking around and saying, yeah, there's also an ethicist in the room, so we're fine. So no greenwashing, no ethics washing. We should be careful with that. A second is that if we join the discussion, we should also accept that we can be overruled. We have to go from the high ground away of first determining what responsible AI is and then say, okay, this is it, we have found it, you do it. No, it will be much more in interaction, and that may mean that some of our ideas will be not making it serious. So that's quite interesting. Ethicists are not used to it, to be part of the boardroom discussion and also be able to overrule it. But that's, I think, we should go.
Well, we both work in the Netherlands, so we have a sort of Dutch approach. But I think it's the right approach in the sense that we can't distinguish, we can separate the ethicists in one room and engineers in the other room. The challenge is to make them a dialogue, to make them a debate together. The challenge is to avoid the figure of the ethicist as a sort of preacher in the desert. So the challenge is to introduce ethical contents in our education, for example, for engineers, but also the challenge is introducing more engineering problems into the education for ethicists, for philosophers. So make them dialogue, make them interact. We have to look at the design process as a social process in which all different, not just stakeholders, but all different actors involved in the development of a technology must be involved. So this means that, as you said, Pieter, we need a sort of holistic approach in which people are able to communicate. Also, they have to accept to be overruled, but also they have to accept that the design process is a sort of social experiment, I would say. So we can't just take the lead of a specific kind of technological development. We can just separate who decides and who talk about ethics and rules and principles. This is the challenge, I would say, and we need this particularly for this kind of technology, because on the one hand, it can have a very important, it can open very important opportunities for our society, but also quantum technologies are much more complex, I would say, in the management also, because of this kind of the myth about the impossibility of understanding quantum technologies. So we have to make this more interacting, I would say.
Pieter, would you like to respond?
So it's kind of a trademark of quantum technologies that is really spooky, different. So we have to spend attention to that quantum nature of quantum technologies. I agree to some extent. I'm also interested in the question of what quantum engineering will tell us in the end. But I think it is also distracting us. When I go to a ministry or when I go talk with the friends of UNESCO, these people are on 10 minutes interviews. Okay, tell me what's going on and what kind of decisions are on the table. If I then start saying, yeah, well, hang on, first I have to explain you quantum entanglement, and they're gone. Go away. I don't have time. Whereas if you say, well, look, this is a computer which can make very fast new medicine, or it can break the encryption of another country, or with this sensor you can look through that wall, even if the wall is 2 meters thick. So, okay, fair enough. And then within, so I explained to you in 1 minute quantum technologies, or the impact of it, and then the politicians know what is at stake. So I just dropped the idea that it's not understandable. It's a philosopher's thing.
Yeah. I mean, this is a fine man's fault, so.
And just for context, we actually have a paper on this with Peter and Stephen on why leading with this idea that nobody can actually understand quantum mechanics has some serious risks in this communication with especially policymakers and ethicists.